In this video, I will go behind the scenes and explain the formulas that make all the work happen automatically. So, for example, if I go here and designate this segment as maternal, how is it that the formulas are able to say that all the segments below are also maternal and also some of the segments above? How does it all work? How does it know how many times this email shows up, how many times it's been used, and how many fragments there are associated with the email that have not been set as maternal or paternal? So the first thing to do is to expand all these columns to reveal the formulas. And here for the email part, in order to calculate this, we need these three columns here and this one here. So the way that it works is this formula counts how many times this email shows up in the column. So J:, J represents the entire column and J10 is the email. So if you look at the email within the column, how many times does it show up? And it's 234 times. So there are 234 segments associated with this email. Then the next formula, what it's basically saying is T is the overall result for the segment, whether it's maternal or paternal. So here is where I normally do the data entry, this column here and also here. So these two are the data entry columns, and then T takes the result of both and combines them. So that, for example, here I have set it to M, and here I have also set it to M. The overall result is M. Here I only set it to M, and this one was left blank. The overall is M. If there is a conflict, if one says M and the other one says P, then T will be set to X, and anything coded with X will be automatically highlighted with red. The entire row will be highlighted with red. So if I go here, you can see that any column that has an X in the T column will be highlighted with red. Anything that has a P is paternal. Anything with an M is maternal. So knowing that T is the overall result of P and S, then what this is saying is if this segment has been assigned as paternal or maternal, go ahead and count the email. Go ahead and put it right here, basically copy it from there to here. And by copying the emails that have been used in here, then we're creating a smaller set that is comprised of all the segments that have been used. So for example, this one is not associated with maternal or paternal, so it doesn't show up here. And by having this smaller subset, then I can count how many I had total, which is here. Then I can refer to this column and count how many times I have used the email, and then the difference, the total minus how many used, will be equal to how many are left. And so this is the unlabeled email count. It's basically saying K, which is the total, minus the number of times that I have used in column L, the email in column L. So if this email shows up 100 times and I only assigned it 98 times, this one will say 100. This column will contain 98 instances, and this one will say 2 because there are 2 fragments that have not been assigned to anything. Then for columns N and O, this is where the magic happens with propagating the value. So you can see here I set this cell P10 to M. It's not a formula, it's a value. And the way that it propagates down is through these um, rows here. This one that says same, basically what it's looking at the phase. So here we have phase 1, and the row above is also phase 1. So meaning that both fragments are in the AND group. So my dad and me, as opposed to number 2, which is the opposite. So by same, what it means is if these two fragments are in the same group, then go ahead and look to see what I have there. So that's what it says here, B. If B11 is equal to B10, if both groups are the same, and X11 is basically measuring whether the segment above overlaps with this one. So if both segments are the same type and this fragment overlaps with the one above, then I'm going to take the value that I have here in P10 and propagate down. So I'll copy basically whatever I have there. Now what happens if the fragment above is the inverse or phase number 2? Then this column O takes care of it. So if B11 is different than B10, so meaning that they're in different phases, one is a 1, the other one is a 2, or vice versa, if they're not the same and the segment above overlaps, then this formula here looks a little bit complicated, but all that it does is it inverses or reverses the setting, so that if you have a P above, so if the above fragment is paternal, then this one will be set to maternal. If the fragment above is maternal, this one will be set to paternal. So it just reverses whatever you had before. So in summary, for these two, they just look at the row above. There is one case for where the fragment is the same phase, and the other case where the fragment is the opposite. And then these two here do the same thing, but they apply to the row below. They look at the row below and they make a determination. Like here, you can see this is a formula. The formula is actually looking at this value that I manually typed, and here you can see that this fragment is the same type as the other one below, and it's looking at C9. C9 is looking to see if the segment below overlaps. So remember, the other one was looking at the above segment to see if the segment above overlaps. This one is looking at the segment below to see if it overlaps. If it overlaps and it's the same kind, then it will give you whatever you have there. And the same goes for the opposite, the inverse. If you have a segment that is of the opposite type and they overlap, then it will take whatever value you have here and it will reverse it. So far we covered this one and this one, so hide them. And I will hide these as well. Now for the next set of formulas, This one that says the start of the new chromosome, the job of this formula here is to detect when the chromosome starts. And it's super simple. What it does is it looks at column C, which is the chromosome number, and it basically says, is the chromosome above different than the chromosome in this row? So if I scroll down to number 2 here, then you can see that the formula returns true because they are different. So very, very simple formula to determine where the chromosome starts. Recombination event is similar to this one, but what it does is it detects the change in phase from phase 1 to 2 or from 2 to 1. So let's see if I can find one. So here you can see we're still in chromosome 3 and it goes from phase 2 to phase 1. So recombination event Okay, so what it's actually doing is it's looking at U and it's saying not U, and U is the beginning of the chromosome, and so it's saying it's not the beginning of the chromosome, and then it's looking at AB, which is segment type above matches this one, so referring to the phase, whether it's phase 1 above and same in this row, and it's saying it's not the beginning of a new chromosome, and the phase above is different than the phase in this row, so that tells you that it's a recombination. This one here, it's actually pretty important because it determines how many centimorgans are being created by this segment. It's being used later on, but the formula, what it's doing is it's looking at, it's looking at the beginning of the segment. So it's looking at the beginning of the segment, which is in D, and it's going to look to see where the previous segment ended, which is right here. So the previous one ended right there, 2.993, and this one starts here, and it's going to calculate the difference. So in other words, how much is this number dipping into the other segment, and then calculates the difference to find out how much it's dipping into the previous segment, and then it's going to divide it by the total length of the segment in the current row. So E minus D, so E is the end and here's the beginning, so this one minus that one gives you the length of the current segment, and by looking to see how much this beginning number dipped into the previous one divided by the overall, it'll give you how much it's dipping into, how much of this segment is dipping into the previous one. Okay, so I just used the calculator to calculate that this is overlapping about 12,000 units, and 12,000 divided by the overall, which you can see it's close to 3 million, it comes out to less than 1%. It's actually a little bit less than half of a percent. So this is not 44%. This is 44% of 1%. The segment above overlaps. So now this formula, what it does is it looks at the overlap, and what it's saying is if the overlap of this segment with the one above is greater than 50%, that's what the 0.5 means, then it's considered an overlap. Otherwise, if the segment, the ending of the segment is less than 3.7 million, which is defined right here in AT1. This is basically what I'm saying, that the smallest segment, the length of the smallest segment might be, and it's my own guess. So it's a number that can be changed here. But I'm saying a segment will not be smaller than 3.7 million. So if I'm looking at the value in E, which is this one here, so if the previous segment ends in less than 3.7 million, it's so small, it's smaller than my threshold, so I automatically say that it's part of this segment. Even though the overlap is very tiny, but I'm saying that it's too small to exist on its own, so I will count it as overlap in this one. This one is doing the reverse of these two. It's looking at the segment below. It's looking to see how much this one overlaps with the one below by doing the same math that we saw before. So if I look at one number, for example, this one that says 85% overlap, so what it does is it looks at this is the end of the current segment, and it looks at this length to see how much is contained within within this segment. So actually the entire thing from here to there is about 3 million, and then it does a percentage of those 3 million as compared to the length of the current segment, and that's how you get the 85%. So 100% of it is overlapping, but the portion of the one below is smaller, and it actually makes up 85% of the segment, the current segment. This one about the gap being too large, what it's saying, I think the idea behind this one is if there is such a if there is a big gap between this segment and the previous segment, then it can no longer be considered as overlapping. So what it says is if the end of the previous segment plus the 3.7 million that I say is the minimum length of a segment, if the current beginning is greater than those two, then the gap is considered to be too far. So in other words, let's say that this line here represents the end of the segment above, and here is the beginning of the new segment. So there's this gap in between. If this gap is greater than 3.7 million, then the gap is considered to be too large. And that's all that this formula is doing here. This formula measures whether the segment above is the same type as the one in the current row, and what it's looking at the faces. So you have two cases. Here is your OR, and you have two ANDs. This is one AND, this is another AND. So you have two cases. As long as this one or this one is true, then the whole thing will be true. So the first one is looking at the case where you have the same face for both segments. Same face, and the value in column T is also the same. So the same face, and they're both paternal or they're both maternal. That's case number one. Case number two is where you have different faces, and one has to be paternal, the other one maternal, or the other one maternal and this one paternal. So they have to reverse, and the faces are reversed. So the case where both faces are the same, the values have to be the same. The case where both faces are different, the values have to be different. And if one of those is true, then the segment above is the same type as this segment. The formula here in AC measures or detects whether this is the beginning of a new segment, and what it's saying is it can be the beginning of the new chromosome. It's not a recombination event. There is not a big gap, and the segment type above is the same, not the same. So meaning that it has just changed. So the segment type changed. It's not a recombination event. It's not the beginning of a new chromosome. This formula is saying if we are starting a new segment, then we're going to look at the beginning of this segment, and if it's greater than 3.7 million, then we're going to use it as the cumulative starting of the segment. If the start is less than 3.7, then we're gonna say that the segment starts at 1, because we know that, let's say that the segment starts at 292,000. Since it's smaller than the threshold, then we're going to go with the 1. If we're not starting a new segment, then we're just going to propagate whatever we had on the row above. So these two columns, what they're doing is they're keeping track of the overall starting and ending for the overall segment that gets exported. So if I go here to see how I got this one, you can see that the one started here, and if I go all the way to the left, you can see that the segment started at 63,000, but since 63,000 is way less than 3.7 million, and I'm basically saying there is no fragment that can be this size from 1 to 63,000, then I'm saying that this fragment technically starts at 1. And so since this is the beginning right here of chromosome 3, the beginning should be a 1, and then the ending should be the 2.7, which we can see here. And let me hide some of the columns so that I don't have to be scrolling back and forth so much. Okay, so I hid some of the columns to make it easier to focus on the data and the formulas. So here for the ending is basically saying if we're starting a new segment, then give me the beginning of the current segment in this row. If we're not starting a new segment, then give me the maximum of E, which is the ending of the current row, and the one above, this one here. So here's a perfect example. You can see that the one above ended at 2.7 million, but the current one ends at 2.9. So it'll give me the max of the 2, which is the 2.9. And same thing here. You can see this row here ended at 2.9, and this one ends at 5.7. So since we're not starting a new segment, it'll just give me the max of the 2, which is 5.7. So it'll keep track of the maximum. It'll start accumulating and all the way up to here. And here you can see that it's actually starting from scratch. It's not assigned to anything, so it's designating this as the beginning of a new segment, and so it'll just copy this value here and this one here. And here it's actually, see how it keeps the same beginning. It's basically saying that it's saying that it is not the start of a new fragment, so it'll just continue to propagate whatever we had above. So these two basically keep track of the overall starting and ending of the fragment. The contribution, so like this one here, the contribution of centimorgans. So what it's doing is this row here has 11.2 centimorgans, but see how the beginning of these two fragments is about the same, and the only contribution is really from 5.7 to 6.8, so about 1.1 million. That's the only thing new, because anything from 3.1 to 5.7 is an overlap. So what it's doing is it's calculating 1.1 million, which is the contribution, divided by the overall. That gives you a percentage, and then it gets multiplied by this 11.2. So basically what it's saying is, if I'm only adding, let's say 10%, if 10% of this fragment is not overlapping with the one above, then give me 10% of this number. That's all that it's really doing. And the same thing for the SNPs. If I were to say only 10% of this fragment does not overlap with the one above, then give me 10% of the SNPs. So same thing there. The cumulative, what it does is it keeps track of where we started. So if I go back here, this is the first time, this is the beginning, and this fragment contributed 7.1, so the cumulative is 7.1. This one here contributed 0.66, so now you just add the two together. Here contributed 9, so add the 3 together, now you have 16. These are not contributing anything because they're just overlapping 100%, so it just continues. So it just keeps track of the overall, and you can see that it gets all the way to 20.75 centimorgans. And the same thing for the cumulative SNPs. It's pretty much the same formula. And now we get to the output. The output basically is based on this one here. What this formula is saying is, if the overall, the cumulative start, this column here, if it changes value, so you can see that it's changing from 1 to 8.5 million. If it detects that it's changing the value, and column T, which refers to the designation of the segment, whether it's paternal or maternal. So in other words, if the segment has been assigned to something, if it's something that we're actually exporting, and it can detect that this is the end of one segment and the beginning of something else, then it will go ahead and give me the chromosome number. And the chromosome number is basically, all the other formulas are saying, if I have a value here, then just copy whatever I had in the other cells, like the face. So in other words, if I have my chromosome number, then just copy the face from column B and bring it over here. Same thing, if I have a chromosome here in AM, then give me the resulting column T and just plug it here. So this is the key right here. As long as I have a number, then these are just copies of their respective values on the left hand side. And I believe that's pretty much it. And so if I go back to the export view, then that's how we get this nice representation where every little fragment has been accumulated into larger ones. And finally, this one here, the one about the face. So what it's doing is it's looking at the face. So if I have face 1 and the fragment is paternal, or I have face 2 and the fragment is maternal, that's also considered to be on the father's side. So these two are equivalent just looking at the face. Face 1 has to be P, or face 2 has to be M. The whole thing is equivalent, and it's equivalent to father. Otherwise, if it's phase 1, it has to be an M, or if it's phase 2, it has to be a P, and the whole thing translates to mother. And that's pretty much the breakdown on the formulas, and I hope this is useful to you.